According to this data, men who are primary breadwinners tend to be of poorer psychological and mental health. And I think this is a really good conversation to have, especially with the changing times. And I don't want you to listen to this and think that I'm saying it should be this way or it should be that way. This is just information that you can put in your toolbox and apply it to your life however you see fit. Please don't get argumentative and defensive in the comments because it's not necessary. But I think that this is a good conversation to have, considering when you think about primary breadwinner men and what that role used to mean back then. It really was so valuable, and it's really frowned upon now, because now you have men who are still sole providers, and we have so much more expectations of them in a way that was not expected of them in the past, and we're expecting them to develop in different ways or show up in different ways. And I'm not villainizing that. They should want to be present, but I think that sometimes our expectations of the sole provider can be very unrealistic. But anyway, this is a good study. So, a good portion of the book. An extensive study comparing men who are not the primary breadwinners to those who are the primary breadwinner finds that the primary breadwinners have poorer psychological health, poorer mental health, their poorest psychological and physical health during the years that they earn the most. Moreover, a woman who shares the financial burden feels psychologically healthier. So we found something that increases the health of both sexes, sharing the financial burden. Again, I don't even agree with this whole concept, but I think that it is good to listen to this information and to apply it, because you might learn something. However, what is healthy is still at odds with the pressure many dads feel to accommodate the mom's choice, whether that's to work full-time, work part-time, or to work full-time with the children. If mom has 3 options, whatever she chooses can feel less like a pressure and more like a choice. And dad usually accommodates with one of his 3 options: to work full-time, or work full-time, which often means working 2 jobs if he is a working class man and overtime if he is an executive. If your son does not know how to identify social bribes and therefore cannot separate social pressure from his deeper desires, he's unable to talk about what he's feeling, and his health will suffer. And I think that this is important to recognize too, because sometimes, even if your husband is talking to you about it, or if you're a man and you're the husband talking to your wife about it, you may find that there's a disconnect because there's so much offense around the conversation. So if you start to talk about your mental health declining, or the stresses and the pressure that you feel on yourself as the man and the breadwinner of the family, you might be met with some resistance, like, oh, well, what are you trying to say? Like, you don't want to provide, you don't want to take care of us, this is your job. And you're met with offense instead of an open ear to actually hear those concerns and to be able to vent. And so this is not about like, oh, well, I'm going to make my wife go to work. This is just about having the conversation and bringing the information to the forefront. So it says we've missed this because the message of the past half century has been how a mom often makes the sacrifice of her career. We remained virtually unconscious of the way a dad makes his sacrifice in his career. Nor did we consider how a dad's entire career might be a sacrifice. The loss of glint in his eye, that's something that we discussed in a previous chapter. By equating high pay only with power and privilege, we missed how it was also pressure and expectation. This made us oblivious to how the road to high pay was often a high toll road. The tolls of losing family time, personal time, time to develop with friends, the tolls that drove the sad men of Mad Men to drink. And this is another thing that I wanted to point out. All of the things that we typically talk about as moms that we lose when we have children, we don't really address those aspects when it comes to dads, because it's almost assumed that they should want to give up things and like put themselves on the line for their family, right? Again, just hear me out. So as a mom, especially as a stay-at-home mom, you might feel disconnected. Your friendships are taking a toll on you because you're not as able to closely connect with your friends. You're not as able to spend time in your hobbies. You're not really able to get out of the house without anybody tagging along with you. You're feeling like you're losing out on sleep. You feel like you're in this cycle of like, I work and then I turn around and I clean up and I cook and the laundry's never ending, and you have all of these things that you're considering. And in that, you're in it so deep. You feel so emotionally entangled in what you're going through that you forget that your husband has his own experiences. And what we tend to do is we're like, oh, well, he goes out to work and, he's doing his thing and he's not having to worry about like these kids tagging along and da-da-da-da. But do we ever stop to consider when he goes to work, he's not at peace, he's working. When he's coming home from work, he's probably not mentally at peace. He's probably thinking about the pressures and the things that go on as far as like, well, how do I manage this family. And we tend to like minimize that experience to be like, well, he just has to go to work, he's always going to go to work, he would have to go to work even if he were single. But we forget that that dedication and the intensity with which he has to work is a lot different. Think Julius on Everybody Hates Chris. If Julius didn't have a wife and 3 children, do you think he would have been working 2 jobs? He come home, sleep like a couple hours, get up and wake up again. Like, do you think that he would have been working that hard if it was just him? Or would he have been able to actually pursue something that maybe was more passion based? Maybe he would not have needed as much money to sustain himself if it was just him that he had to focus on. And again, hear me out. I'm not picking sides. I'm not, because y'all always accuse me of picking sides and missing points. We are having a conversation, okay? But think about that. So the intensity and the level with which he had to go to work, and even the ease of life that he provided to Rochelle in a way that they really did need her to work to provide money for the household. But she would always quit her job because she's like, I don't need this. My man got 2 jobs, right? And so the insensitivity that she had on him being like, he's my man, he's going to provide, he worked 2 jobs, I ain't got to deal with this, and I'm going to just quit. That's an insensitivity, because he would always kind of hint at him wanting her to work, and she would go to work for a time or when they needed it or when they were in a pinch. But Rochelle ain't never hold a job too long. And so but then Rochelle would also be working, and she would come home and manage the home and take care of the kids. And when she was home, she was home. That was her job, so to speak. But thinking about it in that sense, do we look at how hard it was for Julius? And I mean, the butt of the joke was also like, Julius knew how much everything cost. That's 25 cents worth of chicken. That's 12 cents worth of electricity. You threw that water down the drain. Don't do that. That's $1.35. Like, he knew all of these things, and we laughed at it, but really it was so intense for him in his character because he worked all the time. So it was this pressure, and it was almost like this lack of appreciation for all that he provided for the family, and he didn't want to see these things be wasted. And so we have this tendency to not really humanize the experience of the man. And of course, as the breadwinner, that's what I'm saying. It's not like I'm saying, oh, you need to pick and you need to go half and half. No, I think that if we actually addressed what caused these things, because that poorer psychological health, that poorer mental health, and that experience might have a lot to do with the fact that they're not being appreciated. They're doing all of these things and there's no gratitude. So it's almost like, man, I'm doing all of this in vain, and I got to keep doing it whether or not they say thank you. And yes, you're supposed to show up and do what you're supposed to do regardless of if somebody's giving you an applause. And I know that there are moms that are like, well, nobody applauds me for doing the laundry. And I don't even want to make this that kind of conversation. But again, I just want to offer perspective, because why is that the case? And it hasn't been the case before. It's a lot of changing factors that we actually have to consider, and we try to like have these conversations in such isolated bubbles that they don't make sense without addressing all of the other points. So the solution to this then is a serious contemplation of having both sexes share both the raising of the money and the raising of the children. While each parent's individual personalities are a more important factor in determining the best arrangement for them, it's at least good to know that in general, this approach will make both mom and dad healthier and the children do better. Now, I will say, again, this is not a conversation about like, oh, if we should be trying to do 50-50 or whatever. But I think that I made a post before about how to help your husband provide. And there was another missed conversation by some people. I was saying that whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're doing like contribution, and don't get caught up on terminology either, because it's really hard to have these conversations without people picking apart every little word you say instead of like thinking about what you say as a whole. But if you're a stay-at-home wife, you don't necessarily have to go to work to help your husband provide, but it would significantly help if you kept a tight budget and you didn't just spend everything that came in willy-nilly, because that helps the money to go farther, so that your husband's money that he's bringing in to the household for y'all is not being mishandled. If you are both working a job, then yes, you figure it out however it works. The point is not to tell people do this, do this. The point is to highlight little pieces that we miss in our daily interactions, that if we address those points, we could have healthier interactions. Because before the internet, nobody had these arguments about if you should be going to work and he should be going to work, and if you should be staying home and you should be doing this. I have my preference, and I tell y'all my preference all the time. I tell y'all what I think works. But you got to take that information and go in your home and do what works for you, instead of trying to tell other people what they should or shouldn't be doing. Right? So this is coming from The Boy Crisis, which is a book by Warren Farrell and John Gray. Check my stories for updates about book club.